call to action. At the USCCB annual meeting, one bishop says we are not branch managers, openly questioning the Vatican's request to delay voting on measures combating clergy sex abuse. Back to work. Lawmakers return to Capitol Hill following the midterm elections. Plus, a Democrat makes history in Arizona. CNN fights back. The cable television network files a lawsuit against the Trump administration for banning one of its reporters. We're at the White House with reaction. And these tricks are a treat. A priest helps entertain children who are part of the migrant caravan in Mexico. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, November 13th, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. In their first national meeting since the U.S. sex abuse crisis this summer, several Catholic bishops are urging their colleagues to take some sort of action. Proposals include a special commission made up of lay men and women to investigate complaints against bishops. But the church leaders won't be voting on these plans. Yesterday, the Holy See ordered them to delay their response until a Vatican meeting in February.
Bishops are vicars of Christ. We are not branch managers of the Vatican.
Bishop Thomas Paprocki says people are crying out for action and adds it would be, quote, a grave loss if the USCCB failed to take at least some action on abuse. His remarks drew applause from his fellow bishops. Joining me now from Baltimore is Bishop Thomas John Paprocki of the Diocese of Springfield in Illinois. Your Excellency, welcome back to the broadcast.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
You have been one of the voices within the church, as we just heard, leading the call for bishops to take responsibility for their roles in this crisis. This morning, you said it's time for action. What is that action?
Well, the action items that we are looking at this week, we're looking at standards of episcopal conduct, which are similar to the codes of conduct that we ask our priests and our staff members in our dioceses to sign. We are also looking at a special commission for episcopal misconduct, complaints against bishops that would be similar to the review boards that we have in our dioceses, that would be predominantly composed of lay people, and an independent channel for people to make their allegations, and then these would be brought forward to the Apostolic Nuncio, the Pope's representative in Washington, to take then to the Vatican for further action.
Is that something you could do right now, or has the Vatican stopped that?
Well, the Vatican asked us not to take a formal vote on this, and I suggested this morning on the floor of our General Assembly that perhaps there's a misunderstanding of what we're trying to do. And canon law, Canon 455, does talk about for particular legislation, like a general decree, that you need a two-thirds vote and the recognitio, the approval of the Holy See. We're not proposing anything that's binding legislation. We are, first of all, in terms of the standards of episcopal conduct, that is basically a pledge that bishops are making. We're pledging ourselves to hold ourselves to these standards, so it's not something that everybody would necessarily be required to do, but something that we're asking everyone to do. And with the special commission, again, that would be a recommendation. We're not establishing this as part of the USCCB. We're recommending that this be something that would be established, hopefully with the approval of the Holy See. So we understand that there will be this meeting in February that the Holy Father has called the presidents of Episcopal conferences. And so we're viewing our meeting today as giving some very clear direction to our president, Cardinal Daniel DiNardo, that he can take with him to that meeting in February.
The media is being highly critical of this delay, and today the Washington Post published a scathing editorial in which it said, quote, "Again and again, the Vatican pays lip service to the suffering of victims. Again and again, it undercuts its own assertions of contrition." The media often set the tone in this country. Are you concerned about how this delay in action is going to impact the way the lay faithful view U.S. bishops?
Well, I'm concerned about the way not only that they view the U.S. bishops, but also the way they view the Holy See and the Holy Father. Our people here are rightfully upset and angry about what's been happening. They're demanding that we take some action. We have proposals to take some action here this week in Baltimore, and I think it's very important that we do so and that we send that message to the Vatican that they really need to act on this clearly and decisively as soon as possible.
Bishop Thomas John Peprocki of the Diocese of Springfield in Illinois, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
The bishops are being met with more protests today. Survivors of clergy sex abuse say they are angry and frustrated that no action is being taken. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee joins us from the rally just outside the Bishop's Hotel where activists are demonstrating tonight. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Well, victims of abuse who are here at the rally say they hope the bishops and the wider Catholic community will push for concrete change. They say some bishops simply have not been as open and transparent, even on incidents that happened decades ago. Now, this rally, which is happening just next to the hotel where the bishops are meeting, has a number of Catholic activists, writers, and bloggers. Some have been praying the rosary. It's organized by Church Militant, which is a group that has been highly critical of church leadership in the past. Now, not everyone here agrees on what exactly the bishops should do next, but they want the problem rooted out. Now, I spoke with James Grind, who tells me he was abused by Theodore McCarrick in 1969. I asked him why he came to speak at this rally today.
There are many people who are sick and suffering about the Catholic Church, and it's my turn to step up and say that abuse has to stop now.
I also spoke with Dr. Alan Keyes, the conservative political analyst and former presidential candidate. He tells me this is less about anger and frustration and more about love and calling out exactly what the bishops have been doing and what they have not been doing.
People who are moving their mouths, their lips say words of comfort and of repentance, but their actions simply don't match. And in fact, when we look at things that are happening, they seem to be not only not acting against these abuses with courage and with a forthright sense that the standard is not the standard of the world's judgment, but the standard of God's judgment.
And, of course, you can probably hear Dr. Alan Keyes speaking now at the podium right behind me in his very forceful way. Many of these protesters who we notice here and who I spoke to are in support of Archbishop Carlo Vigano. He is, of course, the former U.S. nuncio who has been calling out some of these allegations and actually called for Pope Francis to resign. Many of them have buttons that say Vigano on it and also T-shirts as well. Lauren?
Wyatt, Archbishop Vigano did send a letter to U.S. bishops today. What was his message?
That's right. Archbishop Vigano had really called on the bishops to think back about when they were ordained and about what their mandate was, and that was, of course, to lead the flock to Christ. And he added, I want to quote here, do not behave like frightened sheep, but as courageous shepherd. And, of course, Vigano has issued a number of letters in recent months talking about the church scandal. We've heard similar things here from victims and from supporters of victims' families who are saying that the shepherds do need to smell like their sheep. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reporting from Baltimore. And while the bishops met, Pope Francis elevated the Vatican's sex abuse expert. Archbishop Charles Scicluna has been promoted from investigator to the deputy at the office that processes sexual misconduct cases around the world. It's a sign the Holy Father is looking to improve his response to the global crisis. Congress returns for the first time since the midterm elections, as 10 House races are still too close to call. Democrats won the House, picking up 32 seats, and are poised to win more. We examine what this newly divided Congress will mean for abortion-related issues. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi is at the Capitol after weeks on the road. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. Democrats could try to strip more than a dozen pro-life protections that are added to each year's spending bills. One is the Hyde Amendment. It bans taxpayer money from funding elective abortions. The 2016 Democratic platform called for the repeal of Hyde. Now, GOP senators wait to see what majority they'll have to defend pro-life protections.
Voted for Trump's border wall.
I knew I had to run.
Just when you thought the campaign ads were over.
Lower taxes, a stronger military, securing the border, protecting our Second Amendment and all constitutional freedoms, then I'm asking for your vote in the runoff on Tuesday, November 27th.
Mississippi Senate race heads to a runoff. As National Right to Life restates its endorsement of Republican Cindy Hyde-Smith, reporters question her about these words.
I'd like to ask the Senator about the public hanging comment.
We put out a statement yesterday, and we stand by that statement.
Could you expand on it then, why you said it, what you meant by it, and why people in the state should not see it as offensive?
We put out the statement yesterday, and it's available, and we stand by that statement.
Hyde-Smith is the first woman to represent Mississippi in Congress. She faces Democrat Mike Espy, former congressman and agriculture secretary.
I mean, this is 2018. We're going here in Mississippi into the third decade of the 21st century, and we just should not have this.
As Mississippi's runoff Senate race heats up, we finally know who wins: Arizona.
Arizona rejected what has become far too common in our country: name-calling, petty personal attacks.
The Planned Parenthood-endorsed Democrat Kyrsten Sinema beats pro-life-backed Republican Martha McSally.
Now, we're still waiting for Florida to finish recounting their state's Senate and governor's races. Open Secrets says abortion group Emily's List pumped $3.5 million into this year's elections, including $186,000 for Arizona Senator-elect Kyrsten Sinema. Lauren?
So, Jason, let's talk about the abortion agenda that Democrats could put forward come January.
Well, the House, for one, they could launch hearings on the Trump administration's refusal to help detained immigrant girls get abortions. Democrats can also use the appropriations process to try to stop the Trump administration's policies, including the Mexico City policy. That's that policy that blocks international aid from going to groups that perform or promote abortion. And also, you know, what's going to happen here is that that's going to be in the House, but here in the Senate, pro-life groups will be looking for the Senate majority to keep these pro-life protections.
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. Thanks, Jason. The wildfires in Northern California are now the deadliest in state history. At least 42 people have been killed, and officials fear the number may rise.
Going door to door, house to house, looking for families, loved ones that are missing.
In Southern California, 2 people have died and more than 400 buildings have been destroyed. Local Catholic charities are helping those affected by both fires. Palestinians controlling the Gaza Strip fire several hundred rockets into Israel in the region's most intense fighting in years. The violence began following a botched raid into Gaza by the Israeli military. Residents in southern Israel say they were shocked by the Palestinian response. The Melkite Catholic bishops criticized the worsening situation, saying Palestinians are being oppressed. The Melkites are an Eastern Rite church in full communion with the Vatican. Pope Francis has big travel plans for 2019. The Vatican confirms he will head to Morocco in March. He is expected to discuss migration and relations between Christians and Muslims. He'll also travel to Panama in January for World Youth Day. Trips to Japan and Madagascar are also under consideration. Several thousand Central American migrants are still heading for the U.S. border. The first group arrived in Guadalajara with help from truckers and other motorists. The second caravan arrived in Mexico City yesterday. Many say they're fleeing rampant poverty, gang violence, and political instability. Mexico has offered refuge, asylum, or work visas, but most vow to continue to the U.S. Father Michael Czerny, the Vatican's Undersecretary for Migrants and Refugees, joins us from Rome. You are the direct line to Pope Francis on this issue, and he describes the migrant caravan that we have talked about here in the United States so much as a manifestation of our current economic times. What else plays a role? Violence, I'm assuming.
Well, I mean, but not to underestimate the economic challenges. I think if we put ourselves in the shoes of the migrants whose livelihoods in the countryside especially have disappeared, not only because of economic conditions and violence, but also because of climate change. So these are people who are basically wanting to do what we all want to do, which is to have a job. I think that's certainly an important motivation. But the fear for their lives and the unhappy choice they often have of either joining the gangs or cooperating with the gangs or fleeing, again, in their shoes, we would probably flee.
Let's talk about what the Vatican is doing. Throughout his pontificate, the Holy Father has stressed the need to help migrants and refugees. He even flew 12 migrants from the Greek island of Lesbos back to the Vatican during a 2016 trip. So what are the specific solutions the Vatican is offering?
The solutions are really as many as the people who are willing to help. In other words, there isn't a solution, and there isn't a particular one that the Vatican is proffering. It's rather asking everybody to lend a hand. And some of us might have a spare room, and somebody else might have some food or some clothing. Somebody has skills in language and can help with language lessons, or taking people to the doctor, or showing them how to register for something. In other words, there's no end of things that we can do that are part of our normal life.
Let's talk about the Global Compact on Refugees, which is expected to be adopted by the UN at the end of the year. You're talking about what people can do specifically. What can bishops' conferences around the world do to help the crisis?
Well, they're already helping precisely by encouraging and in some cases organizing and supporting the responses in the respective countries or the respective dioceses. And the bishops in the United States have been very active and vocal and generous and courageous, I think, in helping out when it seemed that it was very difficult. And so, in terms of the compacts, I think the compact is interesting because it tries to make migration less risky, less costly, less hazardous, and less confusing. And these are all things that, again, I think we would really all wish for.
Thank you so much. Father Michael Czerny, the Vatican's Undersecretary for Migrants and Refugees, reporting directly to the Pope. Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up, White House reaction after CNN files a lawsuit against the Trump administration. Plus, is another cabinet secretary out? Another salvo in the President Trump versus CNN saga. The cable news giant is suing the administration, claiming the White House violated the First Amendment by revoking reporter Jim Acosta's press pass. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports with the White House response. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. President Trump often calls CNN fake news. Today, White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders accused the network of grandstanding with this lawsuit. She said the administration will vigorously defend against it, but a lawyer representing CNN says tough questions are no reason to be denied access.
The First Amendment is meant for the press to be able to act on behalf of the American people and the public in getting information. And here, when the White House revoked Mr. Acosta's press pass, it's clear it was based on the content of his reporting, the fact that he was asking tough questions and has been doing that.
The White House stripped Acosta's pass to enter the White House following a news conference last week. Acosta refused to give up a microphone after the president told him he wasn't taking any more of his questions. Originally, the White House also accused the reporter of placing his hands on the intern who tried to grab the microphone. The White House Correspondents Association is backing CNN's lawsuit. It says the president should not be in the business of arbitrarily picking the men and women who cover him. But the White House responds the First Amendment is not served when a single reporter out of more than 150 tries to monopolize a presidential press conference. Lauren?
And despite that, you even got a question in at that press conference. White House correspondent Mark Irons. Thank you, Mark. A report says President Trump may be looking for a new head of Homeland Security. The Washington Post reports Kirstjen Nielsen may be on her way out. And the move could come in the coming weeks or sooner. The president has accused her of not being aggressive enough on immigration enforcement. Up next, a bishop from Ohio talks to us about the issue of racism. And meet a priest in Mexico who makes frowns disappear. As we've been reporting, clergy sex abuse is dominating the meeting of the U.S. Catholic bishops in Baltimore. But there is another topic on the agenda: racism. Tomorrow, the U.S. bishops are expected to release their first pastoral letter on this subject since 1979. Joining me now from Baltimore is Bishop George Murry of the Diocese of Youngstown and the former chairman of the Bishop's Ad Hoc Committee Against Racism. Your Excellency, welcome back to the broadcast.
Thank you very much. Happy to be with you, Lauren.
And congratulations on being now cancer-free. We're very happy for you. You're in Baltimore as part of the discussion on clergy sex abuse. But there's another topic we'd like to talk to you about, and that's racism. This is the first time in nearly 40 years the nation's bishops have spoken out on race. And I was listening this morning to bishops discussing this document, and it seems that the themes are very similar to this document from all of those years ago. So why is it time right now to address this issue?
It is because racism has become such an important topic and such a verbalized topic in our society. I think in earlier years, we were all aware that racism existed, but in many cases, the racism that existed was more underground or sotto voce. Now, in some of the incidents that we have seen across our country, it is very, very obvious, very much out front. And that's why Cardinal DiNardo formed this committee against racism 18 months ago or so, to try and deal with it in a different way than it has been dealt with in the past.
The massacre at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh was fueled by anti-Semitism, and an FBI report showed that there was a nearly 23% increase in religion-based hate crimes. So how do we as Catholics help restore unity when so much of the discourse today is intended to divide?
Well, I was very impressed to see how many Catholics, Protestants, Muslims, people who were obviously not Jewish, who stood with the people in Pittsburgh. I think it's that solidarity. I think we have failed at times to challenge each other and to call each other forward and say we have to see every human being is created in the image and likeness of God. And the more we do that, I think the more we can reduce these incidences. But we have a lot of extremists in our society now, and people have just resorted to violence. The more we challenge ourselves and our neighbors and our friends and remind them that there are other ways of settling differences than violence, the better off we are.
You know, Bishop, how do we change institutions? We can change hearts and minds by our individual actions, but I feel like institutional racism is tougher to crack.
Well, a number of institutions have begun the process by raising the issue, by saying we need to talk about this and not push it aside or act like it's going to somehow be solved on its own. I think that even though it's uncomfortable, we as a church and we as church institutions have to challenge ourselves and have to bring to the fore that there are racist attitudes in some of our institutions. And when we've done that, we can make changes. I think we have to be much more honest about racism, and that way we can start the process of changing institutions.
I think what you're saying is awareness, acceptance, action. Thank you so much, Bishop George Murry of the Diocese of Youngstown. Action.
Thank you very much, Lauren.
Finally tonight, when the migrant caravan arrived in Mexico, officials took one look at the children and decided to call a priest. It's not what you think. Father Antonio Alchives is a Catholic priest based near the shelter. He's also a magician. And he said he wanted children to smile and have a moment to relax their minds and hearts. All right, I can't resist. What do you call a dog that does magic tricks? A labracadabrador? Yeah? No? Okay. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night, and God bless you.